at the way Ben looked at reality, because what is it that gives us our reality? And it was described in his book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, on the Mechanics of Consciousness. And I will talk later why he used the pendulum as the symbol of what he was talking about. We are dealing with two realities. One is this physical, solid reality that we get blue and black marks from, as he said, when we bump into it. But the information about it is given us by our senses. So that is our subjective reality. And so the two really are giving us the totality of our environment. So what is the objective physical reality? And let us look at the atom. If we magnify the atom and zero in on the electron, and now we think now we will get the answer to what physical matter is. But if we analyze the electron, all we find is an oscillating electromagnetic field. There's no physical matter as such. So we think, well, maybe the nucleus will give us the answer. And we zero in on the nucleus, and we find that it too is only an electromagnetic oscillating field in the void, because between the nucleus and the electron and outside of them, there is nothing but void, the same void that fills in the interstellar space. And the ratio of the distance between the nucleus and the electron would be analogous to a head of a pin in the middle of this room and something rotating around it 30 feet away, and the rest is void. So what is physical matter? Ben drew an analogy between the electron and the pendulum by looking at the cross-section, as it were, of the atom and comparing it to reciprocal motion. In other words, we see the electron now on this side, now on the other side of the nucleus, which would be the pendulum motion. So what happens in the pendulum? It stops, it moves, stops, and moves again. In other words, it's action and rest, action and rest. If you took an actual pendulum and would swing it and attach a pin to it, and you would draw a piece of paper under it like this, it would describe a sine wave. Here the pendulum moved and stopped, moved and stopped. And reality really are the spaces between the points of rest. We perceive reality when there is motion. And reality is really nothing but oscillating fields in the void. And the reason I can touch this screen and I don't go through the floor is because my atoms, or the electrons of my atoms, are actually repelling the electrons of the floor. But if I would speed up my vibration, then I could very well go through the floor. So that it's the interaction between the atoms in this reality that gives us the illusion of solid matter. So how do we get information about this solid physical reality? It is through our senses, through the subjective reality. So let's look at that. How does the neuron work? If this is a neuron, and this is the baseline when the neuron is at rest, when it's stimulated by something, and it doesn't care whether it's a loud noise or a bright light, it simply says, ouch, I'm being disturbed. So the more such spikes you have on the baseline, the more intense the stimulus. But somehow through a miracle of our physiology, our brain can construct our reality out of these spikes that simply indicate a stimulation of the nervous system. And we see beautiful flowers and animals and the sky and so forth. And as we know, our senses are very inadequate. They're very limited and imperfect. Even bees, for example, can perceive ultraviolet light, and dogs can hear the ultrasonic. So that we see reality through our senses only through a very narrow slot. And the rest is really unknown to us. And so we're looking at the physical objective reality, which is oscillating, as we saw, through another system, our subjective reality through our nervous system, which also perceives it through action, rest and action and rest and action and rest. So one oscillating system is looking at another oscillating system, and the picture is very blurred indeed. We can extend our realities through instruments, telescopes and microscopes, but in the final analysis, it is only our senses that give us the knowledge. So our subjective reality then is the sum of impressions conveyed by our senses, coded in periods of action and rest, which are oscillating electrical states of the nervous system. And we're constantly comparing one thing to another. Otherwise, we would not perceive reality. For example, if the muscle of the eye is anesthetized, then we do not see anything, because the eye needs to scan all the time in order to see something. So, both realities become real due to a change occurring between two states of rest. When there is change, there is motion, and when there is no change and a total state of rest, then reality, as far as we are concerned, disappears because we cannot perceive it. So let's look at the overall picture. Here is the atom, and it can be represented as a sine wave of motion and rest, which is analogous to the motion of the pendulum. Now, let us take a hypothetical situation where we are taking a wavelength, let's say a red photon, which has a very large amplitude. The distances between the points of rest are very far apart. And then we take the same, let's say 1 inch, in other words, the same unit of frequencies, and we speed them up so that within the same length we have many more ups and downs, and let's say it's a violet photon, and then the points of rest get a little closer together, but we get more of them within that span. Then we speed it up even more, let's say the gamma rays or X-rays, and we see that we get even more spikes and or waves, and they get even closer together. Now, let us imagine a hypothetical situation where the speed has become so fast that it's become infinite. At infinite speed, there will be no more oscillation, and the points of rest will in fact overlap, and you would get a straight line. Now, what kind of state would that be? First of all, we see that it's a paradox, because the infinite speed now has become total rest. We could probably call it the state of the absolute. It's the source out of which all the frequencies arise. And it will also have the maximum energy. All energy is in it, but it's all in a potential state. And when it begins to vibrate, then it creates all these different frequencies which begin to interact, as we saw before, creating our reality. So one could summarize this by saying the absolute is the point where extremes merge, and a state of rest implies infinite speed. In fact, they become one and the same. And this state, the absolute state, is the substrate for all reality which emerges out of it. In particle physics, there is a principle of uncertainty which was formulated by Heisenberg, and it says, when the momentum or the speed of a particle is known, its position becomes unknowable. The more we know about one, the less we know about the other. Applied to the pendulum, what does it give us? When the pendulum stops before it reverses direction, we do know its speed because it's 0. And then it stops again and we know its speed again. So that means that at those points, its location becomes unknowable. And as Ben said, it can be found anywhere in the universe, That is, it becomes the universe. It fills all creation. It is everywhere. And based on this, he developed much of his further thinking. If this is our solid reality, and like a pendulum, we oscillate and we take off every now and then, and we touch that absolute state of total rest. But it happens so fast that we're not even aware of it. And we come back as if nothing had happened. But suppose we can expand that state and experience it, and in fact we can, then this is what will happen. Here is our reality, and here is the other reality, which we now have expanded. And we can be conscious on that level simultaneously with this level, so that we can actually have the benefit of both, and we can explore that reality and bring back the information. And this is in fact what Ben did, and the information that I will be talking about from now on was received in those states of expanded consciousness. Usually in those states of expanded consciousness, there is a different perception of time. People who come out of those states usually say, time has stopped, or at least it's slowed down. What is happening here? And to put it in some kind of perspective, Ben designed this diagram. This is our time-space, and this is the now moment where they cross, which is going from the past into the future, the eternal now moment. And we can project 1 second on it, 2 seconds on it, and so forth. It's very reliable, and we can measure it, and we can catch trains on time and be to work on time and so forth. However, superimposed on that are two other vectors of space-time, which are our subjective space-time. And usually they overlap, and we don't even know the difference. But in altered states of consciousness, there is a deviation. And by altered states, we can mean sleep or meditation or those deep altered states. And the angle of deviation actually determines the depth of that state. And look what happens. If we project 1 second, we see that now in this position of the subjective time, we have 2 seconds for 1 objective second, which means that our time has already doubled. Now visualize the situation where the subjective time tilts more and more and more, where it practically becomes parallel with objective space. And this is what it would look like. Our subjective time is now overlapping objective space. What kind of situation would that be? Well, it would take no time to go anywhere, because you are everywhere at once, because your subjective time has overlapped objective space and it's become infinite. This would be the state of samadhi, the ultimate expansion of consciousness, in which your consciousness fills the entire universe. Well, in those states, where does one go? There are many places to go. And again, to put it into some kind of perspective, Ben designed this diagram of the levels of consciousness in creation, because every level, as we saw before, reflects a state of evolution of matter on that level. And there is an indigenous population on all these levels that relates to that level. And our human band is only over here. So he looked at consciousness in its totality. If this vector here represents the quality of consciousness, this one represents the quantity of consciousness, or the capacity of a nervous system to react to stimuli. So here we put the atom, the virus, the plant, and an animal, and finally a human being. So this is where we are in the range of things, and there are many other levels above, and of course it's all going towards the ultimate state of the absolute that we talked about before, and they're all contained within it. consciousness is modular. A larger consciousness contains a lesser consciousness. We also see here these curves, and these are called energy exchange curves. And they peak in the middle of each band, which means that the interaction with the environment here is the highest. And I find myself, and you find yourselves, in this physical reality because our energy exchange curve is highest in this level. However, we can also interact with the neighboring realities, but as you can see, the curve here tapers off so that we're not interacting as clearly and as well in those other realities, but still we do. And our nervous system is capable of spanning all these levels, except that we seem to be tuned only to this physical reality. And like a radio set, we can receive all the others, but we keep listening to this one. But it's up to us to tune into all the others as well. Below us is the animal, plant, mineral. Those are the realities that Castaneda talks about, for example, in his books, the interaction with those realities. And the upper part is interacting with the human band, which is the so-called emotional level or astral. There are different names for these levels, and it doesn't really matter as long as we know what it means. And the next level is the mental, then the intuitive or causal, and so forth. There are certain characteristics about these levels, and we interact with all of them, and we can function in all of them. The one next to us is the emotional level, and this is where we go in sleep. As Ben said, this is a preview of coming attractions, because when we die, this is where we go, and we all interact on this level. The next level is the mental level, and emotions, in fact, are not allowed there, so that before you can cross the boundary, it's almost as if there is a customs official who says, any emotions to declare, and down you go if you can't release emotions that are negative. Actually, the emotions such as fear or anger. However, love, which sometimes is perceived as an emotion, is what Ben called is the glue of the universe. And without it, in fact, you can't even go higher. So when you abandon those emotions, you can enter the mental level, and here your reality is what you think. It is also so on our level, but to a lesser degree. But here you're actually creating your reality by what you think. The next level is the intuitive level, and this is where we all interact, and people of creative professions particularly visit those areas, and on that level they pick up a lot of information and they bring it down. The creative aha moment of discovery, for example, of an inventor or an artist, when suddenly a solution comes or an image comes, is in fact something that one perceived on this intuitive level. And as you saw before, our time expands on higher levels. So there was an enormous amount of time here to study the entire situation and then to bring it down. But when you bring it down, it appears like a flash, the aha moment, whereas in fact you spent a lot of time there getting ready for it.